Welcome back, everybody. This car may be familiar to you, and it's bizarrely one of the cars I've been the most excited about seeing here at Annual Service. Because I think what a lot of people don't understand about car people is that while we love cars that go really fast, make a good noise, pin you to the back of your seat, we also love cars that really sip at fuel and can be a little bit boring, but are super efficient and super cheap to run. So we've got a really interesting story about the diesel Passat that we have here, and we've got YouTuber Joe Achilles and Patrick Whelen here to talk us through it. So, Joe, people will know you from YouTube. You have 250-odd thousand subscribers. You built a name for yourself for really knowing kind of German premium cars, mainly BMWs. You have an M3 Touring. You have an M2 track car. Why a brown/beige Passat, and why have you bought it here?
Firstly, it's Cashmere. Let's
Sorry,
get it right.
Cashmere.
Yeah.
The Cashmere Passat.
Good question. Well, I mean, I love my fast road and track stuff, but I've also always appreciated hypermiling and getting as much miles out of a tank as possible. And I think over the last 4 or 5 years, I've done a few videos on it, and that kind of brought us up to this car. And here we are today on stage with it, which is just bizarre. This car's had so much attention over the last 3 or 4 months. And I know the PistonHeads auction went live 2 hours ago, and it's already at £3,200, which is just mind-blowing. So thank you to everyone who's already bidding on it. And I know we'll get onto that shortly.
Absolutely. Well, there is so much love for this car, and the reason is because you drove it from Tangier in Morocco, as some people have mistakenly thought of Tangier in like Wales, to London, and that was nearly 1,500 miles on one tank of fuel, which is utterly incredible. How did this all start off? Because this is just a ridiculous challenge.
Yeah, so back in 2020, I was a chauffeur, for those of you that don't know, up until 2021. And so I had a 7 Series 730 LD as my chauffeur car, and during the sort of lockdown times or COVID times, I wasn't working much, as you can imagine and appreciate. So I had this, at the time, brand new 7 Series that I'd literally just picked up in the February, as in the month before we sort of got COVID. So I had that sitting on my driveway, and I thought I needed to start doing some content with it. So I did this first hypermiling challenge, took it around the UK, managed to get 901 miles out of it, I think. And then that led us on to sort of a couple of years later, buying a 730D and doing a bigger challenge and driving that from London to Madrid on a single tank. I say we, Patrick and I, that was very planned, that trip. We had sponsors behind it because we needed it, and that was great. But then I think we got there, we did that over one day, and we arrived in Madrid absolutely shattered. In fact, the last hour of the journey, the younger Patrick had to take over because the older Joe started seeing things jumping out.
He literally thought I was driving into central reservations, and it was it's scary stuff.
It's probably a good advert to really, when you're tired, pull over and have a sleep or stop driving, because I knew he was there with me and there was nothing else on the road. But yeah, it got to a point when you were driving that I was seeing like animals like running out on the road, and I was screaming at him to stop, and there was nothing out there at all.
Yeah.
So anyway, we did that journey and we got to Madrid very late, but we never ran that car down. We still had 100 miles of range left on the odometer reading. So we kind of both walked away from that with a bit of a shallow victory, because it was a bit like, oh, we did it, great, but how much further would it have gone? And I wish we'd carried on that journey. And then, this has been in the making for about 6 months, planning, obviously getting Michelin UK on board with their wonderful e-Primacy tyres, which certainly helped get us over the edge and get us into London. That's the story of the beige Passat, or no, Cashmere.
Cashmere Passat, wonderfully high-profile tyres. So why a Passat? What was it that drew you to the Passat in the first place, and then how did you find this particular car?
Well, I think I can answer that one. So it always ate away at us, the fact that we couldn't complete the 7 Series all the way down to empty. And as we all know, as petrol heads as well, when the range says 0, it doesn't mean 0, and it's a mental game of how far then you can go. So my first port of call was like, okay, well, if we're taking this to the extreme, you need a car with a large fuel tank, like the 7 Series had, but also the most efficient engine. So we went onto the Guinness World Records website, I just searched up the kind of longest distance done on a single tank of fuel, and it popped up, I think, a 2012 VW Passat 1.6 diesel Blue Motion car. And from that moment forward, we spent 2 years like hypothesizing and trying to work out a route and how we could get this car, and like Joe said, with partners like Michelin, kind of make it happen.
And also just trying to make, I think there was some routes that we could have used that would have been better and would have got more mileage out of. But as with YouTube, you've always got to think about the title, and I don't like clickbait, but you've always got to come up with a punchy title. And so in our heads, it was always Africa to London or Africa to the UK if we only made it to the tunnel. But as we got closer to the date, I was like, oh, Patrick, maybe we should do like Portugal or something, because I really didn't have much faith leading up to the trip that we would actually do it. But thankfully, Patrick was like, no, we will do it. And having Grandad sitting next to me for the entire trip, keeping me at indicated 55 miles an hour as I crept up to 57 or something, certainly helped.
So you kind of landed on a Passat. Very exciting. How did you stumble across this exact one? Because I've seen the video, and it is such a find of a car. But how did it come about? How did you find this car?
Well, so we were, I'd say flapping, but we were definitely like a bit panicked. We had maybe a month to go, and we hadn't actually found... 2 weeks. We were looking for like a good condition Passat, but we knew that Michelin and their partners were able to kind of help us revive any car that we buy. We'd seen a few in Birmingham. That's all you need to know. And after that, we kind of had to reach out to people. I reached out to a friend, Ben, who's a dealer, works in the trade. And I was like, look, you've got access to auction platforms. Surely a BCA or something. Can you just search, is there any of this exact type of Passat? And 20 minutes later, he was like, oh, what about this one? I was like, yeah, seems good. I mean, we had to still bid on it, and Joe can explain that process. But we ended up on auction platforms, on BCA, buying a car through trade, because the cars that we could see that were kind of either privately or publicly available weren't really all that good.
Yeah, first impressions were, oh, great, it's beige over beige, basically. But then the more we looked into this particular car, it's a one-owner car from new, full service history, 95,000 miles, or 93, I think at the time,
yeah.
which isn't bad for the age of the car. And yeah, we kind of went for it. I don't think I've ever purchased a car at auction before like that, like a BCA, sight unseen. And so it was scary, but exciting at the same time. I don't think I've ever been so excited about picking up a car, and I'm lucky that I've picked up a lot of newer cars costing a lot more than that. And this was probably the highlight of new car collection.
And Joe, how did the bidding go? I imagine it was like, quite a big bidding war. There was lots of people that wanted a Cashmere over beige Passat.
Yeah, well, thankfully, it wasn't on something like PistonHeads where you've got 8 days with this particular car and lots of people to look at it and bid on it. It's going to benefit all of us. It was literally, I think we had about a 5-second slot there with a guy speaking so quickly I couldn't understand what he was saying. But we were the only ones. To bid on it, so we got it for rock bottom, which I think was $2,500. And yeah, it was great. Went and picked it up and took it straight to Elite Garages, who are a good partner and customer of Michelin. And they went away and sort of went ahead and fixed up the tatty bits and repaired. We replaced parts on it, like the belts and stuff that didn't need replacing, but we just potentially thought, if we were halfway through this journey or this adventure and something broke, it would be a waste of time. So
yeah, there was so much that went into this that it was like we couldn't fail. There wasn't we might not make it back to the UK, and that's okay. The distance, the challenge is the set, and we can get as far into that challenge as possible, but we couldn't not get there, and we couldn't break down on the way, because like I said, there's so much invested in this in time, and the partners like Michelin as well providing the funding for it. So yeah, it was like this car has to be perfect. We have to be able to drive it to Morocco and at least get as far back from Morocco as the fuel tank will allow, rather than there being a mechanical failure.
A highly stressful situation, really, when you think about it. But so it means you need quite a calming and soothing environment. Is the Passat open, by the way? Have you got the keys to unlock it?
it is open, I think.
It
yeah.
is. Because what I wanted to do is just show the people what an incredible interior this is. Now, I don't know if any of you saw last year, had an eBay challenge. We had a Golf GTI. We tried to turn into a track car for 10 grand. And we found this excellent example. But one of the things I loved about it, but not everybody, is that it had this exact interior. Just look at this. I don't know what it's. I don't know if it's biscuit or if it's just cream or beige, but it is utterly delicious.
It is, yeah. I mean, that's one way of describing it. I must admit, when I first saw it in pictures, I was like, "Oh God, that couldn't be worse." But I think because I've grown such a connection to it now, I really like it. And what we haven't talked about is Topaz Detailing in London spent probably about 3 days detailing this car, and it looks a lot prettier now than it did about 2 weeks ago. And part of that is bringing the interior back to the colour that it is now, because it was a bit grubby beforehand, wasn't it? It was
look, it lived a life. It'd done 93,000 miles. It didn't help that we drove it down to Morocco and back. So yeah, it's immaculate. Like, there was a rip in the seat as well, just along this leading edge.
Oh, the seat's been fixed.
It's been completely fixed. You wouldn't even know it was broken in the first place.
And the leather, they put this, I don't know what it is, some kind of treatment on there. But before it was very plasticky. It'd just gone off and then very brittle. And now it's all very very soft and leathery, almost like a Bentley. I mean, it is the same group, isn't it? So maybe it is.
Probably a lot of parts sharing.
It's essentially an efficient Bentley. And actually, this is probably a common colour on a Bentley. So yeah.
I mean, you would have a Bentley in Cashmere as well. So how many miles had it done when you... well, how many is it on at the moment? And we know that kind of 15 odd miles before.
96,441 to be precise.
Still very young, really, for something like this.
Yep.
But it is an absolutely beautiful car, and we had a 50-50 shot of when it was at Topaz getting done, and you saw the armrest, and you'd never realise just how grubby your interior is.
Well, the interior was like a shade or two darker to what it is now, for sure.
Yeah, it didn't look, because I'd seen the videos. It didn't look that bad, but now it's just been completely transformed. So, an absolutely beautiful car. So we haven't even got to the trip yet. So you had it checked out. You had it looked at. It was all kind of looking all right. But you had to get it down to Morocco in the first place. Patrick, that was your job, wasn't it?
Oh, no, Joe, I thought you drove it down to Morocco.
No, I'm the talent. I fly down there.
Oh, you flew into Malaga, did you? Oh, yeah, I forgot about that bit. That you
on the way down.
It actually was, yeah. But, no, only I was here. It was the M5 pre-drive down in Germany, so I couldn't say no to that because I was one of very few that got to drive that car. So when that came in, I was like, "Oh, Pat, so how do you feel about driving down on your own?" But I think you actually had a fantastic sort of trip with Roger Chan. And maybe not initially.
Yeah, so we planned this trip over 4 days. Just stopping off along the way, once in Clermont-Ferrand, which is their headquarters for Michelin, to get some content there with the car, kind of at its spiritual home with the tyres, and then 2 stops in Spain before picking up Joe at Malaga Airport on day 4. An hour and 40 minutes into day 1, the car went into limp home mode, and I pulled over 20 minutes from Folkestone Eurotunnel with the car not working. So, yeah, it was a pretty stressful start to the trip. We'd left at 6 in the morning, trying to get a 8:30 train or something. And as you can imagine, Joe getting a phone call, and then James also from Michelin getting a phone call from me, like, not to worry, but the car doesn't work. Fortunately, silver lining, the car hadn't got into Europe yet. That would have been way more complicated. Oh, yeah. But again, Elite Garages, who had done the work on the car previously, actually had a garage in Canterbury, wasn't it? Which was only half an hour away, so we were able to get the car recovered over to those guys. And 1 broken injector, but 4 new injectors later, the car was back on the road. I got on a train at 7 p.m. and got to Clermont-Ferrand at 3 in the morning and continued on as planned.
Gentle diesel rumbling. Did you fill up on your way down? Was it just you didn't want to complete the challenge?
No,
on the way down to Morocco?
I was 50. I also wanted to, before the issue, I was actually quite interested to do a bit of an eco run and just see how far in sensible terms I could go on a single tank. Once we'd had to get a 12 hours later the train, and I had to kind of stick to the actual speed limits and go a bit faster. So there was one segment, wasn't there, Joe? I sent you a video. I think we were averaging like 130 mpg. We just filled up in France. It was a lot of downhill, so I will give the elevation some credit as well. But the car, I was up until that point, Joe had driven the car, I'd driven the car. We'd driven it motorway miles and stuff, but we'd never seen the kind of numbers needed to complete the trip, and that always worried me. I personally have a 2018 1.6 diesel Passat.
Oh, yes.
Wonder where I got that idea from. And that car I'd got to 84 mpg, and that was nearing what we needed, but we needed 90 plus in this thing, indicated on the dashboard. So once I got down there, I think we averaged 56 mpg, always at the speed limit through France and Spain, and going through towns, and just normal driving the whole way. But once the car was fixed, the injectors were done, it never skipped a beat, and picked up Joe at Malaga Airport before heading down to Morocco.
And so were there, you get to Morocco, were there any changes that you had to make to the car to make sure it could get through the journey? Do you have to adjust the pressures? I know you're kind of running on e-primacy tyres, or was it just...
I at the beginning of this trip, Joe was adamant to me that I could only bring the smallest amount of camera equipment. Now, given we're making a video on this, it's important to have the right gear, but at the same time, I completely appreciate. So I turned up with the smallest amount of luggage I could possibly bring. Joe, you brought...
a suitcase and a couple of handbags.
Two suitcases.
Quite a lot of weight with me.
My first thing I would have loved to have done is just dumped all of Joe's stuff in Morocco and left it there, but no, instead, we did the pressures, and then Joe can tell the story of how we managed to fill up the car to full, because that took a while.
Yeah, so, I mean, in terms of pressures, we stuck to what Michelin recommended, but the higher limits. So we sort of took it like the car was fully laden, because essentially the higher pressures, the more efficiency you're going to get, to a point, I think. But then if you run them too high, they then have less grip and all the rest of it. So we needed to sort of balance that all out. But what Patrick, again, had researched is when they did the world record in this car, so part of why this particular model is so special is it has a 70-litre fuel tank as opposed to a 60-litre fuel tank. Oh, yes, I feel really nerdy to that. And I think that 70-litre tank came from the Audi A6 Ultra that they made for a few years at the same sort of era, which was based very much on their Le Mans winning cars and the long distance sort of thing. So it was a special fuel tank that they inserted into this. But you'd found out that the record holders had actually squeezed 77 point something.
Yeah, well, again, as part of a Guinness World Record, everything has to be adjudicated. So the car has to be under 6 months old to do a world record. And also, they measured the amount of fuel that went in. So they worked out the amount of fuel they put in was 77 litres. Obviously, you've got the fuel tank itself, then you've got all the pipe work and how the fuel goes around the engine. So I was confident that once it clicked at 70 or whatever it clicked at, there was way more to put in the tank. However, we were in Morocco, and it turns out in Morocco you can't fill up your own car, so you can't spend 25 minutes filling it up. So that caused its own issues, didn't it?
Well, we before that, when we picked it up from the BCA auction, it had literally fumes. Well, actually, the gauge was showing miles, so it probably had about 400 miles of range in it. But we took it to a petrol station on the way to Elite Garages, and I filled it up, and I was like, right, ready to see like at least 70, because we knew about, and it clicked at like 60. And I was like,
you thought we'd bought the wrong car.
I was like, Pat, we bought the wrong car. How are we going to break this to James and Michelin? But thankfully, what we didn't know at that time was when the gauge was in red zone, there was so much more fuel left in the tank, and bringing us up to Morocco when we're filling it up. So we got away with a couple of minutes of dung, 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 and there was like a big queue of cars, so we had to move on. But thankfully, we had a 10-litre jerry can in the boot, so we filled that up as well. We drove round the corner and down to the hotel, because we'd even researched where to fill the car up in relation to the hotel, so that once we filled it up the night before the challenge, we could roll down to the hotel. So we didn't have to use any fuel. So we'd rolled down to the hotel and parked it on a slope initially just before the hotel. We got the jerry can out and started pouring it. We got a couple of litres in, then it came up. You could see it at the top. Left it. Patrick was like, I was like, that's it, let's just go. He's like, no, more. And it went, blah, 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 a couple more. Anyway, we end up, no word of lie, getting exactly 10 litres of this jerry can in there, to the point that it wasn't going down anymore. It was just sitting there. You could see it flush. So we worked out, we squeezed in about 73 litres in Morocco, plus the 4 or 5 that were already in there. And when we refilled it in the UK after it completely ran out, we worked out it was exactly 77 odd litres. So there is some magic. There's some magic storage of fuel somewhere in there, and I don't know where it is.
And lots of clicking, just constantly, ready to get every inch in.
I mean, it got to the point that in the morning, we got up at 4 a.m. to embark on the way back, because I was adamant that we had to get to the port 2 hours before it opens, like it says on the website, even though there was no one there. But I then got the jerry can out again with the last dregs and was like, can I put any more fuel in this? because, the game's the game. We're trying to do it on one tank of fuel. Nobody said that, it has to be in the fuel tank. It can be in the pipe on the way to the fuel tank if you want.
So the journey begins. Tank's primed. So's the jerry can. What kind of driving techniques are we talking about here? Because you can't just cruise. It sounds almost like, Patrick, you had the hypermilling experience here to really eke out as much as you could from this.
He was the pain in the arse.
Yeah, I was definitely the granddad in this scenario, which is weird given everybody thinks I'm Joe's son. But no, so I'd obviously got my 1.6 diesel Passat prior to buying this car, and so I'd done my own hypermiling research by just driving mine around. And basically, if you look at the torque curve of one of these, it's like 1250 to 1400 RPM is like peak torque, which is quite low and also fantastic because at about 55 miles an hour in sixth gear in this thing, you're doing about that. So really, you've got that peak pull for going up and down hills and stuff, and it also then ends up being the most efficient speed. So I'd worked out that to average the highest MPG, which should be like 90 plus, we need to do 55 miles an hour all the time.
But what you don't set yourself up for, and although we'd done a similar journey, at least half of it with the 7 Series, is Spain and France. There's a lot of hills, undulations, those little mountains called the Pyrenees, and all of that you've got to go through. And in fact, the minute you get off the ferry in Tarifa in Spain, you're faced with like massive hills, and I think the first bit of it we're down into like the low 40s or something, and I was like, this is not going to work. But then you're slowly gaining it back. But then we had a headwind the whole way. When we got to France on day 2, it rained for 50% of that day, heavy rain as well. So obviously rain causes more friction with the tyres and all the rest. We had everything thrown at us, so it wasn't an easy journey. But again, that kind of made it real life. Apart from the fact that we're sitting at 55, and genuinely, like, the problem with 55 is
Here we go. He's gonna. I don't like the trucks.
No, well, yeah, I'm a backseat driver even when I'm driving, and I hate seeing cars that are capable of doing 70 miles an hour on the motorway sitting at 50 and messing with trucks and buses and all that. So I'm always the one to go, what are they doing? Like, seriously, get off the motorway or sit at 65, 70. But we were that person for like 2 days. And but I figured out if I was at 57, 58 indicated, would go a little bit quicker than most trucks, so we weren't messing with them. But if we sat at the 55 that Grandad here wanted us to sit at, we would be messing with the trucks to the point that on the downhills they would overtake us. Then we would, and honestly, so I'm really sorry to any of those truck drivers and bus drivers, but actually, as it turned out, if we hadn't have done that, there's so many small things that made up to the 1,500 odd miles and made all those differences over the 2 days.
Well, Joe talked about at the beginning about like he's into fast road cars and loves his track work as well. So I just employed a track day mentality, which is don't check your mirrors. If someone wants to go past you, I mean, that's up to them, right? Like I'm doing my drive and I'm being safe on my overtakes and stuff, but if someone else is going faster, then they have to decide what they want to do.
Even if there's like a massive lorry flashing its lights behind you
Well,
and on your backside, it's just
I'm not worrying about his fuel, I'm worrying about my fuel. So
I did not realise that I'm hypermilling here. So you get through most of Spain and France with relative ease. You get back to the UK, and then the clock strikes 0 miles.
Well, it actually strikes 0 30 minutes before we got to Calais.
Yeah, 21 miles outside of Calais. Foggy, like, honestly, I'm not exaggerating. I wouldn't be able to see any of you lot. It was that bad, the fog. The weather, it was just awful. And suddenly, that last bit of the range disappeared quickly, and it was like 0. And it's like, we've got 21 miles till we get to Eurotunnel. But I wasn't too worried at that point, because I know that it's most cars, and don't quote me on this, but the majority of cars, when you get to 0, you got 20 or 30 miles, especially driving at 50 miles an hour with that engine.
Well, I did some research and found out that the Passat has apparently about a 1.7 gallons left at that point, and that's how it determines when to put on the... I think, what did it say when the fuel light binged? It said we had 120 miles or something.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, with the amount of gallons left, we knew we had some range, but then with this foggy weather following the sat-nav, we came up to some roadworks. I wasn't driving at this bit, so I'll let Joe explain.
Throw me under the bus.
He said, watch this, and then...
No, we had to come off the motorway. It was a nightmare, so we had to then do like A roads and back roads, 0 range. We knew that the train we were meant to be on, we had to get there like in 10 minutes time. But we got on the train, and getting on the train was like a big sort of, we were in the UK at that point, you know, like unless the train broke down.
That for me was completion. If you watch the video, you'll see me and Joe being eerily silent, clearly very stressed because we're on zero range. We've accidentally come off the motorway by no fault of anybody's other than just this roadwork situation, having to navigate back roads. We get on the train and like the relief, you can see like the pressure just drop in the car. At that point, I was like, I don't care what happens now. This has been so stressful up until this point. We've had this breakdown. We've obviously got the car there. We're bringing it back. But we are now in the UK. And like Joe said at the beginning, worst case scenario, it's Africa to the UK rather than Africa to London.
And it did eventually conk out, but you got through London and then just basically, I guess you'd reached your goal then. It was just to see how much further you could go.
Yeah, it's actually just, it's quite annoying really. We got into London, we got through London, we saw Buckingham Palace, we saw Big Ben, we did some car spotting in Knightsbridge. And then Joe was just like, well, do you want to go to Heathrow Airport? Because Joe had left my car there. We'd swap cars so I could drive that Passat down and Joe could go to the airport for his trip. Yeah, we ended up just having to do laps of Heathrow Airport until it ran out.
Yeah, like at 2 a.m, so there was nothing around. We were literally doing laps of the
like
northern
ring roads,
Ring Road. And finally it ran out, and I think a lot of people, in fact, today have come up and talked to me about it. And it's the first, probably and maybe only time that I've been so happy for a car to run out of fuel. Because it was just like the thought of getting home in my own bed and just everything. It was like, it's finally dying 123 miles after it said there was no range left, which is just mind-blowing. And it died, yeah. And but thankfully, we had a jerry can with us that we'd filled up in France, put it in. It turned over a few times, but it fired up and, yeah. Because we weren't sure about that. We thought if we run it right down, like, are the electronics going to go mad? Are we going to ruin something? But
because diesels can be a bit funny, isn't it? If you run them right until they're empty. But
yeah, not the mighty Passat.
No, bulletproof Passat fired right up.
Yeah.
So challenge complete. Nearly 1,500 miles on one tank. Just such an incredible achievement. But now, unfortunately, it's time for you to pass the keys on to somebody else. And we've actually got it up for auction at the minute. But the profits and proceeds aren't going in our pocket or yours. They're going to a really good cause, right?
Yeah, so I actually purchased the car to begin with, and Michelin UK supported us for loads of everything that happened. And I knew I had to sell it once we got back and we'd done all the videos and stuff. As much as I'd like to keep it, I know my other half, Lou's, out there somewhere. And I know she maybe wouldn't have been too happy if I'd kept it. But yeah, so, I'd spoke to James and I was like, look, I'm going to get rid of it now. And he was like, just hold that thought 1 second. And then he came back to me the next day and said, look, actually Michelin would be really happy to buy it off you, providing you auction it off and it goes to charity. And then PistonHeads, you guys being a great partner of Michelin, you jumped forward and got involved with it all and have been super helpful. And I'm not just saying that. The advert itself is a masterpiece. And then it just went further. Then it was like Topaz Detailing got involved and we're like, we'll give it a stage 3 detail. So it's been down there for the past week. And that's why it just looks unbelievable outside.
It is the nicest Passat you'll ever see. I said when I only saw it for the first time today, and I said, there's no way this car left the dealership brand new looking like this. There's no way a VW dealership would have taken this much care and attention. And mechanically as well, it's had more than its fair share of parts, even parts it didn't need. Everything wear and tear has been replaced.
Yeah, I think
immaculate.
We worked out when you add up all the parts, everything Topaz had done, Elite Garages, the e-primacy tyres. I think there's been about 8 or 9 grand thrown at this
at least,
car.
Yeah.
But the good news is it's been online, for 2.5 hours or something now.
Hang on, I'll check the advert.
And it's over £3,000 in 2 hours. So yeah,
it's incredible. There's so much love for a brown Passat. You just really wouldn't believe it. But yeah, the proceeds are going to such a great cause with Mind Charity. So yeah, please head on to pistonheads.com. Go and put a bid in on just this extraordinary car with such an amazing story behind it. It's on display on the Michelin stand, just a little bit further down, kind of opposite the PH stall. But we've only really just scratched the surface of the story today. So you have a podcast where people can kind of find out more about it, and obviously the videos too.
Yeah, so I've got currently 2 videos on the channel, the collection and the main video. I've shot a third one that I'm finishing. It'll go live tomorrow, sort of saying goodbye to it, Topaz, and talking about you guys. And then we also shot on our Drive Talk podcast channel. Patrick and I got interviewed by Petrolped about the trip. So similar to what we've been talking about here, but a bit more in depth about everything. And so if you're interested, and
there's about 3 hours worth of content.
If you're that nerdy, and you've literally got absolutely nothing to do,
there's 3 more hours to go on the Cashmere Passat.
Then go and check it out. But as you mentioned, I did forget to say, it's all the proceeds are going to Mind charity, which are close to my heart because I've suffered from mental health over the past 20 years or so, and they're fantastic, and it's just great that it's going to go to such a great cause. I can't thank you guys enough. Michelin UK, Elite Garages, Topaz, Patrick, James. Yeah,
it's a great cause, a great car, a great story. Thank you both for coming on, Joe Achilles and Patrick Whelen. Everybody, thank you very much.